This video is brought to you by World Anvil. Good morning interweb, let's world build. Coasts vary dramatically in terms of topography and landforms. This makes them really difficult to classify. For now, let's be a little expedient and say that on our fantasy worlds, all coasts are either rocky coasts or sandy coastal plains. To mimic Earth-like conditions, most of our coastlines should alternate back and forth between these two types. Rocky coasts will dominate on active plate margins, near coastal mountain ranges, and in areas that were subject to recent Ice Age glaciation. Sandy coastal plains will dominate on passive margins and in areas of low relief. Overall, a naturalistic split here is about 80-20. The primary features of high-relief erosional rocky coasts are cliffs and shore platforms. A cliff is a vertical or near vertical rock exposure. If the top of a cliff weathers and becomes rounded, we call it a bluff. Cliffs and bluffs may be punctuated by coves and gorges. Coves, small circular bays, form on concordant coasts. That is, coasts where bands of rock of varying resistance lie parallel to the shoreline. A small inlet is cut through the resistant rock and then a wider circular bay is carved out of the less resistant rock. This can be the sea's doing or a river's doing. Multiple coves can form in sequence, sometimes even merging together. Gorges, also known as geos or yawns, occur when a strip of weaker rock running vertically through a cliff is eroded away by wave action. Shore platforms are platforms of rock extending out from a cliff base that are only visible at low tide. They can be horizontal or they can slope gently seaward. If no platform is visible at low tide, the cliff is a plunging cliff. Shore platforms are not smooth. They tend to be pockmarked with depressions and protrusions, scored with ridges and gullies, and dotted with rock pools and marine potholes, cylindrical bowl-shaped hollows. Platforms form when cliffs retreat. Wave action cuts a notch in a cliff overhangs, overhang becomes unstable, collapse, cliff retreats landward, rinse and repeat, and boom, we got ourselves a platform. Rocky coasts tend to start off with an irregular coastline, with headlands and embayments. Nature does not like this. It will seek to smooth things out by preferentially eroding away any headlands. As they bite the dust, headlands leave behind some cool landforms. Wave action will carve sea caves into the side of headlands. These sea caves may have associated marine geysers or blowholes, that is, holes in the roof of a sea cave through which large fountains of sea spray can be ejected. If a blowhole grows too large, it may collapse, forming a sinkhole. The sea caves will eventually erode their way through the headland, forming a sea arch, which will then become unstable and collapse, forming a sea stack. The stack now protects the adjacent shore from the waves, so a buildup of sand/gravel can occur, slowly building out a tombolo, a narrow ridge of sediment linking the stack to the mainland. More on these later. Over time, the sea stack will erode to a sea stump and then eventually disappear. So, the evolution of a rocky coast is basically this. Finally, if the sea level rises and or the land sinks, the coast is said to be submergent. If the sea level falls and or the land is tectonically uplifted, a coast is said to be emergent. Emergent rocky coasts may feature extra high cliffs or uplift terraces. This is where old cliffs and platforms are lifted up out of the sea and new cliffs and platforms form. You can also get fun stuff like raised sea caves hanging out hundreds of meters above sea level. The major submergent rocky coast is the fjord coast, which we will talk about later. A lesser known submergent rocky coast is the Dalmatian coast. These coast types form when tectonic activity creates a series of folds running parallel to a coastline, a concordant coastline. Submergence occurs, the valleys are flooded, and a new coastline is formed. One where a bunch of rocky islands run parallel to the new shoreline. Croatia's Dalmatian coast is the prototypical example here, but it's also thought that the islands off Sumatra formed in a similar way. The primary feature of low-relief, depositional, sandy coastal plains is the beach. There's actually a remarkable variety of beach types out there, way too many to cover here, links in the usual places, so in the spirit of simplifying things down for workability, we can say that beaches may be either pebble beaches or sandy beaches. Pebble beaches, aka shingle beaches, consist of coarse cobble-like material and are usually found in the vicinity of rocky cliffs. They can occur at any latitude but are common in the mid to high latitudes, because glaciers are a great source of coarse material. Sandy beaches are composed of fine sediment and again can occur pretty much anywhere, though they are particularly common in the tropics. The colour of a beach is determined by the colour of the sediment in its surrounding environment. Beige, white, pink, black, red, orange and green are all attested beach colours. The majority of sandy beaches will be beige. White beaches are common in the tropics, particularly on tropical islands. Pink beaches are quite rare and should be limited to tropical islands. The colour occurs when the remains of reddish corals wash up on shore. Black, red, orange and green are, to varying degrees, also rare, and are usually the result of some sort of volcanic activity, so place them sparingly in your volcanically active regions. Beaches often, though not always, have a dune system associated with them. On Earth, the largest dune systems occur in the temperate zone, where strong onshore winds blow. Dune systems tend to be smaller and less common in polar and tropical regions. As previously mentioned, coasts will alternate between rocky and sandy. In some places, asymmetrically curved beaches will link rocky headlands together. These beaches are known as, among other names, logarithmic spiral beaches, cause their curves are exact logarithmic spirals. How cool is that? Now, most of the landforms associated with coastal plains occur as a result of a thing called longshore drift, the transportation of beach material along a coast parallel to the shore. To explain, an incoming wave will break and send water up a beach at some angle, the swash. Then gravity will drag the water back to the sea perpendicular to the shore, the backwash. This produces a longshore current and a sort of sawtooth motion. Beach material will be dragged along this path and so will move down the coast in the direction of the longshore current. If the land were to suddenly indent at an angle greater than 30 degrees, so like at a bay or estuary for example, the longshore drift will stretch the coastline out into the open water, creating a sandspit. A sandspit is basically a beach only connected to the land at one end. Spits come in a load of flavours. Recurve spits form when a sandspit curves back towards the shoreline, in response to changing wind and wave conditions. If multiple recurves occur, then you got a compound recurve spit. Comet-tail spits form in the lee of islands where longshore drift is acting on beaches on either side of the island. If two comet-tail spits merge, a looped barrier and an enclosed lagoon forms. Lagoons are bodies of shallow, quiet water protected from the open sea by some sort of barrier. Paired spits form when a spit grows out of either side of a coastal opening, like a bay or estuary. Cuspate spits, or forelands, form where two opposing longshore currents meet. They are triangular shaped and wider than they are long. As previously discussed, tombolos are deposits of sediment that form in the lee of islands connecting them to the mainland. If this happens, the island is called a tide island. If several islands are tied, we refer to the structure as a tombolo cluster. Sometimes double tombolos can form, and Y-shaped tombolos form when a comet-tail spit joins a cuspate form. Also, if a tombolo is partly or completely covered at high tide, we call it a tombolino, or tie bar. A barrier beach forms when a spit grows across most, if not all, of a bay, or where paired spits merge, or where waves deposit material in an offshore bar to such an extent that the bar grows above the high water level. The water between the barrier beach and the shore becomes a lagoon. Storms may breach the barrier beach, creating narrow inlets and a chain of barrier islands. Barrier islands can occur on most coasts, but 49% of Earth's barrier coasts are located on passive margins. Like before, emergent coastal plains may feature uplift terraces, so-called raised beaches. Submergent coastal plains form estuaries. Speaking of which, estuaries are long and narrow tidal inlets that connect to the open sea. They are a transition zone between the rivers and the sea in which freshwater and saltwater mix. Their associated coasts are called estuarine coasts, and are, for the most part, submergent in nature. Broadly speaking, estuaries come in four flavours: drowned river valleys, bar-built estuaries, tectonic estuaries, and fjords. Drowned river valleys are coastal plain estuaries. They form when sea levels rise and flood low-lying coastal plains and river valleys. They have a characteristic dendritic pattern. Bar-built estuaries, aka restricted mouth estuaries, are similar except they have significant barring across their mouths. Tectonic estuaries form when tectonic activity causes a large hunk of coastal land to sink, which is then flooded by seawater. And finally, everyone's favourite, fjords. Fjords are long, narrow, steep-sided, flooded glacial valleys. They form in mid to high latitude regions that were once subject to Ice Age glaciation. That is, during an ice age, glaciers can carve out valleys into coastal mountain chains. Once the ice age is over, the glaciers melt, leaving behind deep U-shaped valleys. The water once stored in the glaciers enters the sea levels rise, U-shaped valleys drown, and oh would you look it, fjords. Organic coasts are coasts in which living organisms control the landforms. Tidal flats, aka mudflats, are regions of mud and silt that form in the intertidal zone in regions protected from strong wave action. So like in lagoons or on shores protected by barrier islands. That is, tidal flats occur in association with coastal plains. Tidal flats are totally submerged at high tide and exposed at low tide. A tidal flat will usually have one or more tidal channels flowing through it, as well as numerous tidal creeks. If the tidal flat is high enough, salt-tolerant plants will start to colonise the flat, forming a coastal wetland. Mangrove swamps and salt marshes are the two main types of coastal wetland. Salt marshes are dominated by salt-resistant herbs, grasses, and low shrubs. They occur worldwide, but the most extensive ones occur in the temperate zone, on low-lying, ice-free coasts, bays, or estuaries. They are also very likely to occur on the landward side of spits or spit-like structures. Mangrove swamps are dominated by salt-loving trees, the mangrove tree. They are limited to the tropics and subtropics since mangroves can't tolerate the cold. And finally, let's finish up with coral reefs. Coral reefs form in clear, well-lit, warm waters, so are limited to the tropics and subtropics. If a volcanic island rises up out of the ocean, a fringing reef will likely form around it. A fringing reef is a coral reef that extends almost right up to the shore. Fringing reefs are also found along continental tropical coasts. As the island moves off the hotspot, it will sink, but the reef will continue to grow. The result is a small island surrounded by a lagoon and a barrier reef. Eventually the island will be totally submerged, forming an atoll. And finally the reef itself will sink, forming a flat-topped seamount known as a guyot. So, the evolution of a tropical island and its reef is basically this. In summation, think of your fantasy world's coastlines as alternating between rocky and coastal plains. Rocky coasts dominate and mainly go here, coastal plains here, and these are some of their associated landforms. Estuaries occur when coastal valleys flood, fjords go in the mid to high lats where glaciers were a thing, organic coasts are often associated with coastal plains, mangrove swamps in the tropics, salt marshes in the non-tropics, and coral reefs in the tropics. If you follow these tips and tricks, you'll end up with a naturalistic looking and feeling fantasy world. Though, bear in mind, this video is not meant to be exhaustive. Coastlines are, as mentioned, bewilderingly diverse. There's a ton of complexity here I've abstracted away for the sake of time and practicality, so I strongly encourage you to look further into the various topographies mentioned. Trust me, you won't regret it. Good morning interweb, this video is brought to you by World Anvil, the ultimate world building platform for game masters and writers. World Anvil is a browser based set of world building tools that will help you create, organise and store your creations. Interactive wiki-like articles, maps, calendars, historical timelines and family trees. World Anvil has got it all. They even have an RPG campaign manager and full-blown novel writing software. Try World Anvil today for free by clicking the link in the description. That way they'll know you came from this video. Big thanks to World Anvil for sponsoring the show. World Anvil, the ultimate world building and TTRPG campaign management platform. Also, World Anvil was made by two folks, Janet and Dimitri, so it isn't like a big bad corporation or anything. So if you need a place to store your world building and you'd like to support independent content creators on the internets, World Anvil might be worth a shout. Again, links in the description, that way they'll know you came from here. This video is also brought to you by you, the patrons. In particular, Lichen, Johan Spaedtke, Oliver Reed, Spencer Brownlee, Alexander Roper, John Hooyer, Ripta Pasay, and World Anvil. Thank you again to World Anvil and all the patrons who helped make Artifactian a possibility, and thank you for watching. Until next time, Edgar out.